but I'm of the age I can't see my wording anymore. Good morning, so I'm Linda. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Pottstown. I will be facilitating the service today. I want to welcome everybody, and there are no newcomers, but there are some people who haven't been for a while, so thank you for coming out on a beautiful, sunny, which is so rare these days, sunny Sunday morning. We are a liberal faith community that intentionally welcomes all. We do this without requiring adherence to any religious belief or creed. We try to foster a climate of purposeful inclusion, an environment where all can feel safe, valued, cared for, and given an opportunity to form meaningful connections with each other. So whether it's your first time here or your 100th, we hope you know that we cherish you for exactly who you are. Are there any announcements?
Cliff is home with a cold. He doesn't have COVID. That's why I was a little late today, because he's doing this test. Poor kid. Just a reminder that Cliff is doing his cooking demo on Saturday, June 21st from 10 to 2. I think it's $25 fundraiser, if I'm not mistaken. And he'll be doing souffles. I don't remember what kind he's doing. One's going to be, I think, a chocolate or a Grand Marnier and maybe a savory. So anyway, so come out for that. Thank you.
I also have an announcement. So just as a reminder, next week after the service at about 11:45, we will be holding our annual congregational meeting, which is very much in alignment with today's topic of democracy. This is how this community demonstrates democracy. We will be voting for the new board. We'll be voting on a new budget. Hopefully everybody received the email that had a copy of both the announcement of what we're voting on and a copy of the budget. If you are not able to make it, just as a reminder, only members are allowed to vote, but all are welcome, and I encourage everybody to attend. If you cannot make it, if you want to write your vote down on the different issues, sign them, then that's voting by proxy, and we can count it. So, yes?
Question. I know we got the budget. Do we also have a report of actuals?
What you have, what should be on that budget, is where we are estimated year to date for the current fiscal year, and then what you see then is compared to what the new budget will be. Mm-hmm. Any other questions on that? All right.
Okay. This is a little announcement that anybody who is in choir, we have 2 more Sundays where we can practice. We're going to be singing a cappella. So please, we'd like to have all the voices possible so we sound terrific. So 9:30 next Sunday and the Sunday after that. Thank you.
Thank you, and I will look for a volunteer to light the chalice. Come on up.
That'll be quick.
The words today for the chalice lighting are by Pat Uribe-Lichty. Throughout the history of this nation, we have faced challenges to democracy. Challenges that call us to hope in moments of despair. Challenges that ask us to persist in the faith that we can and must make a difference. May our flaming chalice recommit us to truth in our words and our actions, that we may live as we believe people should live. And our opening words are by W.E.B. Du Bois from Human Rights for All Minorities, an address delivered to the East and West Association on November 7th, 1945. Democracy is not merely majority rule based on the fact that the majority has the physical force to prevail. It rests upon the fact that when we have proven knowledge, interpreted through the experience of a large number of individuals, it is possible through this pooled knowledge and experience to come to decisions much more fundamental and more far-reaching than can be had in any other way. The people participating effectively in this pool of democracy must be alive and well, they must know the world which they are interpreting, and they must know themselves. So we will go to our first hymn, which is 323, Break Not the Circle. Please stand as you are willing and able. And thank you, Kay, for playing the piano.
Sorry, I'm filling in for Emily on short notice. I don't know how to make the words bigger. My apologies.
That's okay, not a problem. And now it's a time for a story for all ages. So. Anybody wants to come forward? Come on forward.
Once upon a time, in a land not too far away, there was a magical place called Democracy Land. In this place, everyone had a voice and participated in how things were done. The animals, the plants, and the people all lived together in harmony. In the heart of Democracy Land stood a magnificent talking tree. This tree was like a wise old friend who knew a lot about how things worked in Democracy Land. One day, a group of animal friends gathered around the tree. There were Felix the fox, Rosie the rabbit, and Dean the deer. They had different ideas about what game they should play that day. Felix wanted to play tag, Rosie wanted to play hide and seek, and Dean wanted to play soccer. The talking tree listened to each of their ideas carefully. It explained that in Democracy Land, everyone's ideas mattered. They decided to vote, and each friend had the opportunity to choose the game they wanted to play. Tag was the winner, and they all played happily. As the friends played, they realized they needed some rules to ensure the games were fair and fun. They went back to the tree and asked for advice. It told them that in Democracy Land, the rules were made together. Each friend could suggest a rule, and they would all talk about it to decide if it was a good idea. Felix suggested a rule that the players couldn't run too fast in tag. suggested a rule that in hide and seek, the hider couldn't hide too far away. Dean suggested a rule that in soccer, the team should be balanced. They talked about each rule and voted whether to include it or not. If more friends liked a rule, it became part of their games. One sunny day, the animal friends gathered to decide if they needed a leader for their group. They thought about how leaders could help make decisions and solve problems. They all agreed it was a good idea. The tree told them that in democracy land, leaders were chosen through a special process called voting. Anyone who wanted to be a leader could tell their friends, and then everyone would vote for the one leader they believed would be the best leader, for the one they would believe would be the best leader. The friend with the most votes would become the leader. With their new leader, a wise owl named Olivia, the friends worked together to keep Democracy Land a happy and fair place. They helped each other when someone was sad, shared their snacks, and listened to each other's ideas. They also learned that in Democracy Land they could talk about important things that affected everyone. They discussed how to take care of their land, what to do with the extra fruits, and how to organize fun events for everyone to enjoy. As time passed, Democracy Land became a wonderful place where everyone's voice was valued. The animals, plants, and people grew closer, understanding that their differences made them stronger together. And so the story of Democracy Land reminds us all that no matter how young or old we are, our ideas and voices matter. The end.
I want to live in democracy land. We'll get there, but first, without paying taxes. So now's the time for the offertory. And really, the reason why we need to do an offertory, we got bills to pay. I'd love to give you something spiritual, but hey, right? In order to function in this democracy land, we do need to pay some people. So I'll give you this. Any donation is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
We seem to be down to only one of these, so we'll make it circulate through the entire place. If we can find the other two. So just, in democracy, just pass it around, place to place.
So we can talk while that is being passed around. We don't have to watch each person put money into the basket and guilt them into donating. So we are continuing being you. What does it mean? We finished out the values, so now we're going on to broader subjects. And the one that I thought is really sort of pressing is our principles was belief in the democratic process. And as Irene and the Social Action Committee is stepping up, a lot of the activity and the frustration that is being voiced is regarding the democracy and what's going on in the United States of America. So I thought it would be a very interesting conversation to talk about the belief in the democratic process. So first of all, history, democracy. When was the first democracy? Anybody know? Want to take a guess?
Greece, 5th century Greece.
So that's sort of what most people do believe. Anthropologists are now finding that earlier hunter-gatherer societies, right? anytime you had like 50 or 100 people, they all sat around the campfire and talked around and came to a decision, which in essence is a democracy. So while the formal, right, the Greeks certainly did put a lot more things into place, the concept of everybody having a voice and being heard happened a lot earlier than that. I got another question. Is the United States a democracy or a republic? Good, you guys are so good. What's the difference?
One, we elect the leaders who are going to make the rules, and the other one, we elect everything.
I'm hearing it. Who's doing? I didn't see the mouth moving. Oh, okay. I just didn't go far enough. Yes, I don't know if you heard her,
No.
right? So democracy is where everybody sort of sits around and makes a decision, like we said, sitting around the campfire, right? A republic is decisions are made through elected officials. Right, so we are basically a democratic republic. We have elected officials that then go ahead and vote and make the decisions. So hopefully that makes sense. It's interesting. I actually thought this would be a fairly straightforward conversation. And as I was doing some research, boy, is there a lot out there. I based, and this is a very interesting article, and I can send you the link to this, but a lot of the facts and figures that I'm going to present and how I'm going to frame the conversation that we are all going to have it's called An American Democracy Built for the People. Why Democracy Matters and How to Make It Work for the 21st Century by Michael Sozan. And it's important. This was September 2024. So it was before the election. So we're going to do it in 3 parts. The first of which is, what are democracy's fundamental values? We'll talk about what's kind of going wrong, why is it failing, and then more importantly, we're going to talk about what's for you to do. So the first, what are the values of democracy? What is it that makes a democracy a democracy?
That all people get to have a say and hopefully it is respected.
Okay, Miranda?
Well, equality.
Majority rules.
Okay. Okay, free and fair elections. Checks and balances.
Representation matters.
Representation matters. All representation matters of all people. So pluralism, basically. Respect for the rule of law and promotion of equal justice.
Respect for the individual.
Respect of the individual. Freedom of expression. Independent news media. And informing the public and holding government accountable. So no matter which side I went to, and you look at what are the fundamental principles of democracy, that's the basic ones that kept repeating. All right, that's what Michael Sozan actually puts in there. And the other thing, I think we all know this, is that governments in democratic nations produce more peace and prosperity than any other form of government. But democracy is struggling. He used the words failing. I'm going to use the word struggling. All right. And here are some interesting tidbits. A Gallup poll in 2024, 53% of Americans believe the US is a poorly functioning democracy. 22%, only 22% of Americans trust the government. A 2023 Associated Press poll, 53% of people believe that their views are not represented well in government. 71% think that what Americans want should be highly important in laws and policies that are made, but only 48% think that what Americans want is actually factored into the making of the laws. So what do we think is driving that negative attitude?
The difference between what Americans want and what are the laws. Example, gun control, where 95% of Americans believe that we should have control over guns, and yet we do not have any laws, not many laws to support that.
John?
Money, so much money from the rich people and the corporations influencing the election.
You have to blame it on our representatives because they're supposed to represent our viewpoints and not go their own way when they come to voting.
So a lot of what I'm hearing is, so our elected officials are not, representing our point of view. A lot of that may be gerrymandering of the districts, right? A lot of this is, and he goes into this very deeply that I'm not going to, but he points out outmoded structures of democracy, right? So gerrymandering. The Senate filibuster, right? Which just basically shuts down the Senate when somebody has a point of view and nothing's going to get moved forward to voting. He points out, and this is a debated subject, the Electoral College, right? That the least populous states, which are primarily white and gun-toting, are, getting in the way of what the majority of Americans want. And he's saying is the Electoral College. And these are things for us to, just basically think about. But really the dissatisfaction that you're seeing is what? It's kind of coming down to the quality of life, right? There's economic inequality, right? So people are dissatisfied. There's difficulty to access government services, or they're doing away with government services, right? Quality of life varies. Protection of fundamental rights differ broadly, right? Cultural and racial resentments are growing. I mean, we see it every day. One of the things that's frightening to me is out of all of this is a desire for autocracy. And think about what we're seeing now. 32% of Americans, 32%, would support rule by the military or a strong leader who could act without interference from other government branches. 40% of younger Americans, I don't know what I couldn't find what the cutoff considered younger Americans, agreed that rule by a leader who can make decisions without interference from legislature reports, 40% believe that would be a good system of government for the United States. Only 27% of younger people felt that would be bad. One of the reasons that they're saying that is because if you think of younger Americans, what have they seen in the government? The government not doing anything. The government being blocked, being stymied, not moving anything forward. So from their point of view, they're not seeing that this is really effective and helping to change their quality of life, because that's really what we want. Yeah.
In college, we were taught that a benevolent dictatorship is the most efficient, effective method of governing. The problem is the benevolent part. if you don't know if you've got benevolence there or not. And so if you've got a king, you might have a great king who's fabulous, or a great queen who's fabulous, but unless they're benevolent, then it's terrible. So a benevolent dictatorship is wonderful, and that's what these people would like to see, is a benevolent dictatorship. That's not what we're getting.
Yeah.
But
And
they
it's-
see it as a
Yeah.
So they what?
There's people that are convinced that that's what it is. That there is a network. But that's where like it gets back to the democratic idea about like equal voice, like you know, not balancing, not tipping the balance towards certain voices. Like when you talk about what laws get put in, you know, what laws can get passed, to John's point, what laws can get passed quicker, like a law that helps inner city people access healthy food, or a law that lets Walmart keep like 15% more of their profits per sale or whatever, you know what I mean, like. That's where it's been tilted, but they've been making a percentage of Americans be convinced that that's part of the benevolence, like. Yeah, you know, we gotta keep these companies happy so they stay in our country, you know.
There was another poll that took place in January of 23, and it looked at kind of perception of democracy. 83% of white Americans believe democracy is best. 71% of Black feel that democracy is best. 67% of Latino Americans felt that democracy is best. 21% of Black and 20% Latino said that it made no difference whether this country was a democracy or a dictatorship. And if you think about it, because they haven't seen the government work for them. So, on that note, as if that's not depressing enough, we're Unitarian Universalists, right? We believe in democratic process. We want to change this. So now we get into what I really think is going to be the heart of the discussion. What's a UU to do? I mean, we could lament, we know what a democracy is, we know what it looks like. Democracy land is a dream. Our founding fathers said it was an experiment. It's an ongoing experiment. And democracy needs to continue to evolve, which it has, right? From when the founding fathers signed the Declaration of Independence to what we have now, right? Just the fact that we have constitutional amendments shows that our democracy evolves. So, what can we do about this? The state of affairs. This is where y'all talk amongst yourselves.
Well, we can show up and make our voices be heard. For instance, I think most of you got that email about the No Kings rally that we're doing on the 14th. That's a prime example of what we can do, because even if it's just 2 people or 22 people, us being there with that nice merchandise of your UFA t-shirts that so many of you have purchased really speaks volumes, right? People always stop me, you know, a lot of times and ask, do I go to church? And I tell them about this fellowship, right? So, and I explain how it's not a church, but, you know, also spiritual in many ways. And what I do talk a lot about is the social justice aspect, right? And I've been telling a lot of people about this rally that's happening. And so we will be having some other people from the community join us. And I think that's a prime example that's very current, that's coming up, and how as UUFP, as well as Unitarian Universalists, we can get out there and try to make a difference, get our voices out there.
Okay. What else? Yeah.
The 5 call that it gives you a list of all of the you know, representatives and who to call, and gives you their number. It's a great app if they have it for Android and iPhone, and it reminds you every day who you should be bugging.
Did y'all see that? What else, Judy?
Volunteer for different organizations like their district that in this drive, they actually have redone the map, but there are no rules to keep that permanent. We've got a big problem coming up with the 2030 election with the next time the census is taken. But there are an awful lot of groups out there that know how to make noise, and we need more people.
And it's focused noise, right? There's one thing to make noise, and while it feels good to get with a bunch of people and you're protesting and it's a general sort of protest, if it's a specific about an issue or two, right? Fair districts is about gerrymandering, right? It's about how do we protect that the legislature should not be drawing their own districts. That needs to be done by independent people, right? The other groups that are out there. Diane.
Running for office.
Running for
Running for
office.
office. And serving. Running for office.
Yep, running for office and serving. How many of us have run for office for anything? Here we go. And that counts here too, right? Because if we keep this place alive, then that helps to continue it. So. Miranda, you,
So, I'm not sure what to do about this, but it seems to me that part of the problem is that young people who are, have a different attitude or opinion about this, some, or many. I don't remember what the numbers were, but, and it seems to me that, it feels like they aren't aware of what it's like to live without the blessings that we have that come from a democracy. So they have no sense of what the difference would be. Because they have, you know, like we do, they have their electronics, they have their, you know, they go to school, they have food. And they don't remember a time when they didn't have that.
or they didn't know a time. I'm probably, if I'm 65 and I barely remember civil rights, I do remember Vietnam and having brothers that would be of age to be called up and going down the lottery. After that, outside of gas prices and 9/11, there really has not been anything. So part of what I think we can do, or y'all can do as parents or as teachers, right? History is so important. And can you make history live for the kids, right? It's not just words on a page, can it live? Which is why I think parents or grandparents who knew it, telling those stories, right? So I know World War II more through what my father's experience was. I know Mary does too, right? We have a much different perspective than if we had just sat in history class at school. So I think there's an educational component. Go on, Miranda.
So only so much we can do with our words, because it's not likely we'll be listened to. As we get older, you know, we're saying we're preaching. And it seems to me that their realization is going to have to be from experience.
Unfortunately.
I don't remember when I was young, there was a concern if someone got sick. You know, nobody had insurance then, at least I didn't know people who had insurance when I was quite young, and then it sort of came up as I was, you know, growing up. All of a sudden, my father, who worked for DuPont, had insurance, health insurance for us. So that was kind of new, at least to us. Now it's, we think of it as a luxury. Some of us, and
Or a necessity.
yeah,
And because it's such a necessity, yeah.
wasn't that big. Yeah, it's true. I was recently having so much paperwork from my parents. Found the folder concerning the bills for my birth. I'm in 1951. Do you know what it cost them? $2.50. I was 16. My mom was, I actually have a $2.50. I was in. I think you had to get pressure when I was 9 or something, and I fell off a bike and was in the hospital. That whole building was like $18.50, even though the wages were substantially different then than they are now. They didn't have corporations trying to make their fortunes off of healthcare and driving people into poverty because they could not afford, or death, because people can't afford healthcare. It's just a total change of the views on what it takes to be successful here. Yeah.
And that's, so, yeah, it's younger people don't, and I shouldn't say that because I think kids that are graduating from college are getting a stark dose of reality. Right? It is, oh, this is the real world, right? Jobs are hard to come by. And what do you get with that job? And oh, you actually have to work for that job to get your paycheck. So CJ, you were gonna say something?
Well, what I was gonna say, was that one of the things that we as a country, those of us who believe in democracy in this country, really need to do more long-term planning. This is not something that just came up in the last 10 years. This is a directed, long-range plan that started 40, 50 years ago to take over the justice system and to eliminate the difference, the checks and balances that we all believe in, to gerrymander as much as possible. And which of course 40, 50 years ago wasn't really possible to the level that it is now. It's only possible to gerrymander to the level that it is now because of the advent of technology. So it's a double-edged sword, this capability. So, but we need to long-range plan because fighting the short term isn't gonna do us a whole lot of good. But we really do need to think more long-term and make a 10-year plan to get back our democracy.
Yeah, 2025, right? That's a long-term plan that we are seeing being put into place. So Chad.
So to buttress your point about any kind of long range plan, and obviously it's near and dear to my heart, but it does get back to education, but like educating the younger generations. However, educating the younger generations isn't just like teaching to them about the way it was when my dad was little or whatever, like those lessons fall flat. It's helping them understand like their agency in the world. Like a 22, 23-year-old kid right now that's graduating from college with $100,000 in debt, just trying to buy their first house that costs $400,000 with 6.5% interest rate. They don't see the connectivity between, okay, if I vote this election, it's not gonna make my rate go down. You know what I mean? Like they have to be able to have belief in the system. Working with teenagers, part of making them like understand how the system works is preaching the classic reliable sources and media bias. Like understanding the world that they live in. It's not ABC News, NBC News, and Fox News. They don't watch any of them. They're on social media apps, doom scrolling. And a lot of the influencers that they're seeing as of this year aren't even real people. They're AI. Like I do a whole thing with my students for can they go fishing and find an AI influencer? And it's like every day in class they're talking about a different AI influencer, and some of the kids are like, "That's not a real person." And it's like they have no idea how much time they're spending in a world of fabricated fiction. So it's hard. I feel like a lot of times when people are like, "Oh, these kids, they spend their whole day on social media or whatever," it's like, well, that's the world they've been given. That's the world they've been brought up in. You know what I mean? Like you can't blame them for that. The adults around them didn't understand the impact that these changes in social media were going to make. So I see it like as an intergenerational conversation where it's not like, well, this is how it was when I was little, and this is what you need to do. Like when I hear that kind of conversation, I think of like congressmen or whatever who are like, when I graduated college, I worked a minimum wage job. I made $6.50 an hour, and I was still able to pay for the other. And it's like, okay, well, $8 an hour now in 2025. You can't even stop. Wow, yeah.
25.
So I think it's like on both sides of the fence. I think it's like the younger generation obviously needs to learn the hard fought lessons. Just look at any discrimination against LGBT people, whatever. But there is a flip side of that, where there is an education that has to happen for the older generation to understand what life is actually functionally like for the younger generation, to understand why they're disenfranchised or why they're buying into
Yeah.
a false problem.
And part of, so again, and what I'm hoping is if people are looking for causes to get behind and you wanna protest or you wanna. Part of what he goes into this in here is we have got to get legislation around technology and social media.
Yeah.
And it just has to happen because and he absolutely believe it, that is gonna be the downfall.
And that's what I think, like, where the money goes, you know, like I mentioned before, this book, The Anxious Generation, written by Jonathan Haidt, which was published last year. It's about how technology, specifically social media, is affecting the mental well-being of this current crop of teenagers. But even Jonathan Haidt, who is petitioning Congress for certain things, he knows that he will never succeed getting a law against a multi-billion-dollar company. So the way he's trying to navigate it is, what can they control? Okay, he could get a law passed to stop push notifications after 8 p.m. to allow teenagers to get better sleep, teenagers under the age of 16. You know, it's just like, you need to find people in the public sphere who know how the current version of the system works, which is why Project 2025 was so successful, because that's what they studied, and that's what they tapped into. And that's how they were able to sway so many 20 to 25-year-old white males into voting a specific way, because they kind of like mobilized digitally and accessed that sphere.
Yeah, there was, John, I see your hand will get to you, but just a quick comment along that. I had listened to an interview with Jen Psaki. And they were talking about, what happened, you know, with the Democrats losing this past presidential election. And we knew, I probably shouldn't admit this, but in the pharma industry, when you put together public or patient education materials, you put it at the third grade level. It has to be able to be understood by a third grader. Okay, which means you can't use necessarily, and I don't want to big words. It has to be relatable words. The Republicans were great at using relatable words. The Democrats notoriously use what I refer to as Reader's Digest words. Right? We all understood it, but the majority of people didn't. They were using big words or theoretical words or anything. So it's when you're relating, that you're relating at the level that people understand it. I'm sorry, John.
Yeah, so two comments. One is, I've said this before, when I was educated in New Jersey, part of the curriculum, it goes back to the whole concept of curriculum in high school education, which is that students have too many choices today as to what they want to learn and don't want to learn, and they're not old enough to know what they should learn and not learn. So aside from other things that were mandated in New Jersey, in 10th grade, we all had to take American History 1. In 11th grade, we all took American History 2. You had no choice. Different tracking levels had different levels of sophistication and expectations, but we all had to take that and spend a whole year, 2 years learning about the United States and how it grew and hopefully the Constitution. And I don't know that many students, and Chad can comment, have that mandate today for whatever good it will do to have an education. That's my first point. My second point, if I can remember it. Sorry, it's part of getting older. We had a speaker some years ago, Reverend Dave was here, I think, so a different generation. The guy was from mainline UU. His talk was about democracy at some level, if I recall correctly. And the comment he made, that the mistake that Democrats often make is they want the whole loaf of bread. They're not going to compromise with it. And he gave an example of legislators where the one who would have, if elected, would have been the compromiser and would have accepted 67% of the Democratic goal, if you want to call it that way. The platform gets defeated by the person who goes out and says, I want everything. What happens, that person goes out, you can't get everything, and they get voted down. So I think as we go forward and look at our candidates, we have to pick people who accept the fact that you're not going to change the world in one day. And if you have enough good ideas and accept the fact that they won't all get through, but you have some principal ideas that can go after those, will do much better than attempting to have a an unworkable agenda going forward. Change has to be incremental. We can't accept or assume that we can just change things all of a sudden.
Mary.
I was gonna say, yeah, change is, I think that's the big one is, change is incremental. You can't, like this project, 2025 has been in the works for at least 45 years, 50 years. Wasn't called that, but it has been in the works, like getting the judiciary, the whole bit that CJ was saying. But I was going back, we keep going back to high school, so I'm going. One of the things that my sister reminded me not so long ago, when we were having one of these discussions on the phone, was graduate high school, at least when we were in high school, I don't know if it's changed, I hope not, was in order to graduate, you had to pass a test, a state test on both the state constitution and the US Constitution.
What state is that?
Illinois.
It was not Pennsylvania.
And it's like, that's pretty cool, we had to pass on both constitutions. And it is the Chicago area, again, people who are not from there do not realize what a political town it is. Politics is the game in town. And when the congressional elections would come, we had one Democratic congressman, he was an awesome congressman, name was Andrew Mikva. And he started every campaign at our high school. And he came and he spoke to us, and we would have interaction with him, and he'd go back and forth and back and forth, and it was a wonderful conversation with high school students. He was engaging with us. So then his opponent, well, I guess I have to go to Niles West too. And he was ripped. Because when he got there, he treated us like we were high school students that we didn't know SWAT. But we did. And there was that respect, and I don't know if kids just, and it wasn't going to speak to a whole big group, it was a little group like this in a classroom. To just maybe 30 students, but they spent their time talking to just us. And I haven't heard of anybody doing that, where you just are engaging with the students, instead we go back and we talk to the classmates, you go back to your parents and say, this guy was awesome, this guy was a complete putz. And that's just it, that engagement.
Donna, was there another? No.
I did just wanna say, I don't think our local politicians do that as a matter of course, but we did have, Paul Friel come and talk to, Cyrus's, Cub Scout Day. And he invited the day to go out to Harrisburg. He said that, you know, if we could make an appointment for that, we could both check out the state conference. The way he was engaged with them, he took all of their questions very seriously, even the ones that were obviously ridiculous. His 10-year-old was, you know, this. He was really engaged with them, and he was being honest and genuine and helpful. It was great. And I just saw him, he was great. Yep.
But just to tag on this point, like that's why it's so important to pay attention to like your local school board. Because like right now, if you had a politician enter a high school right now, it would be like news, you know, like either side of the aisle, the parents would be out there protesting that person accessing students. It would be like a wildfire in the local school district, but what keeps happening in local school districts, some of them have it where only a certain number of seats are up at an election, so that it's not wholesale, but like every other district will have it where the 9 seats are up and 9 get elected, and what keeps happening is like if one side gets elected, they're trying to do all their things at once and get it all put in, and then the community reacts, and the reactionary thing is that they all get voted out, and then the opposite side of the aisle gets voted in, and then they're all trying to do their political action, and the education of the students and what they should be learning falls through the cracks, because everything's more about how you're allocating tax money, and if you have your characters in a high school book and stuff, you know, like that. It's so important. Like I cannot believe how much impact I see local school board members have, and the followings they build up, and their activity on social media and stuff. It's so wild to see, and then 2 years later, we never hear the person again, and they spent tens of millions of dollars of taxpayer money on whatever their pet was at the time. It's really important to pay attention to local elections.
Yeah, and that's, I think, one of the important things for us to really think about, and particularly as we try to educate younger people, is really change starts at the grassroots level. And yes, we are angry at our president, at our congressman, and we only get a chance to vote once every 4 or 6 years. But there is a lot that we can have almost direct influence on at the local level, right? School boards, so important, as Chad said, right? And that's going to impact what your child is learning, right? At the state level, right? And do the children know who? Do the kids know? Do teenagers know, right? What's going on at the state level, who that person is? Can they be exposed to that? Because even though Pennsylvania may have gone red, North Coventry Township stayed blue, right? So North Coventry had an impact. The votes counted here. And that, I think, is what the lessons that at the local level, and if you get enough grassroots local level, it starts to build. And that can be the education, things we can take on as individuals or even as a group. And I'm sorry, Diane.
We talked about education and history. I went to a very highly respected school district. My education was not as accurate as I was led to believe. There were a lot of things about the history of this country and the way I was taught that slavery ended at the end of 71. That's bullshit. Check your facts. Check the things that you were taught that you assumed were true. You'd be surprised at how much of it is not, and how much of it was, how much of the truth of the founding of this nation was covered up. How much systemic racism and generally awful behavior was covered up, and you were taught, oh, that ended, and we no. Re-educate yourself. And when children are educated, insist that they be educated with actual truth and not with the same snow job that we were educated with. Make sure your kids and your grandkids and your nieces and your nephews and the children that are in your life know better. Aren't just taught to accept the snow job and education that they receive. If you're a teacher, do better. I realize that teachers don't get to control the curriculum when they're taught, but they have an opportunity to present truth beyond the curriculum to their students. And teenagers are human beings. They're not idiots. They may have a lot of more hormonal challenges to their brain patterns, and they're still forming brain patterns. But if you treat them like humans, like they're adults, they will respond and surprise you. Great deal. That's for people in their 20s. So re-educate yourself. Re-educate yourself.
What is the saying they say? The problem with history is it's written by the victors.
Right.
So you're only getting one side of the story. John?
Yeah, a quick comment, so that I think Chad will appreciate this. When I grew up, my parents were an essential part of my education and my understanding about history and what I was learning in school. And a modifier to that comment, in my case, more so my mother, could have been my father, but my parents had a good sense of democracy, just to touch a subject of the day, among other things. And that was essential to my teaching. And I don't recall they objected to the school district. I think it was less civilization back then, if that was what the district taught us. But I'm sure I feel for the parents raising children today, or I'm upset with the parents raising kids today as to what they believe or don't believe and what effect they can have on their children's understanding of their education. So if someone came to me, if one of my kids came to me, my generation, and spout out something that they learned in school that I would feel was dead wrong, or was poorly taught, I would certainly have offered a correction to it for whatever value it was. I would have modified it and said, I'm not sure that that's true. Here's something you might want to read. You know, what kind of responsibility or knowledge do our parents have today in that? And it gets back to democracy, because we need to make sure what our kids learn in school makes sense. And it may not, and it doesn't always make sense. And I think there's a parental responsibility as part of the kids understanding democracy and the correct education in that venue.
Along those lines, there was another article that I had read that how many, I know I grew up this way, I don't know how many grew up this way, or the parents that have children now. Do you have family meetings where you vote on, where you talk about, and you make a family decision on something? That's democracy. Are you showing your children democracy by doing it that way, or is it more autocratic, dictatorial, benevolent, even though it may be, because you love them? But that might be, again, something else to do. There's one more topic that I wanted, we've talked about education, there's one more thing that I think we can have some control over. And that, I'm surprised Mary hasn't brought this up yet. What do you think it is, Mary?
Oh, part of it, wow.
The media,
Yeah.
right? The media.
The
Well, are we, so here's something, I mean, just ask yourself, I'm not looking for a show of hands. How many of you actually do subscribe digitally or still get the paper to a local newspaper, a big city newspaper, right? Are you supporting the media? Are you, if you're like me, all right, I'll show my hand. NPR is already on my car radio and playing in my house. I'm a huge supporter of them, both TV and radio. If you like ProPublica, if you, whatever it is, are you supporting them? Because those channels are at risk. Miranda.
I really want to just change the subject back to young people.
Okay.
Because I love Unitarian Universalist history. There's a man that was a member of the Cherry Hill Church. His name is Ed Shem. Recognize that name, Shem? His son was a high school student in Germany. Back in the 50s or 60s, could it be? And it was prayer in school, the prayer in school time. His son was the president of the student body. And he was made by the school there in Germantown to get up and read from the Bible every day. And so this young man who did a lot of his own thinking showed up one day with the Koran and read and was suspended from school and took it to the Supreme Court. The Shems did that. And after a number of years, the Supreme Court ruled in their favor. And that's how we got no prayer in school. So that's a kid for you. Doing some thinking.
Yeah.
Some really good thinking. And Ed told us that he wasn't all that worked up about doing this, you know, and he said, we're Unitarians, I'm not sure the Universalists, and they had just been Unitarians, but he said, you know, you gotta watch what you're talking about. Yeah.
I want to piggyback just a second. With my school system where I was in Skokie. And I was talking to some friends and these two women were talking about parent school. And one woman said, the other woman, well, Mary would disagree with that anyway, to have people parent school. And they said, besides, I don't think you'd like the ones that were in school. But my school, they had been in Hebrew. Because it was primarily Jewish.
Yeah.
We were closed for Yom Kippur and so I don't think people ever realize that there are schools that are majority Christian.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing it back to young people, because I actually wanted to talk about young people again. Thank you for that. Eternal optimist here, so a couple of really positive points. I work with a lot of younger people, especially teenagers in their 20s, big part of my private practice as well as my contract work with a local community college. And I feel like with this last election, there's so much care that I'm witnessing in young people. I mean, it's very, very noticeable, even from 10 years ago, even from last election. When the last election happened, I was working around the clock, and I think a lot of you know, just because how upset young people were. And not that they were just upset, they were looking for action pieces, right? So they were standing out there, they were protesting, they were rallying, they were speaking to their friends, they were organizing. So this is something I did not witness 10 years ago, definitely not in the, Bush Gore election, when I started college and any of that. So there's a lot of positivity that's happening there with young people. And I think that's the upside of this type of black and white, dark and light type of election with, who we have in charge right now. Young people are noticing and they do care. So I see that all the time. It's very apparent. Another piece is I grew up in Ukraine. It was part of Soviet Union, right? So it was in the communist system. This type of discourse, we would all be locked up, okay, and sent out to Siberia or even killed. So we are very, very fortunate. There's still a lot of really great things going on right now. And even us talking like this, it is such a blessing. So yes, there's bad things out there, but there's also a lot of wonderful things, this being one of them.
So hopefully, in lieu of time, just a couple of things we talked about, because I'm always about the action items. Whatever we can do, first of all, vote and go local, right? Because these are probably just as important, if not sometimes more important than the big every 4 or 6 years federal elections. Strengthen, make sure that they are free and fair elections. If you want to volunteer to work the polls, if you want to volunteer for fair districts, right? That's stuff that we can do. Support the media that's getting the truth out there. And do what you can to limit the impact that technology is having on kids, whatever it is. And we talked about a huge educational portion that we can take on individually or through our school boards or through our teachers. So there's a lot we can do. As Irene said, this is still the only country I think I still want to live in.
I don't know that, but
I don't know, is St. Martin a country?
there was no war in Ukraine. No,
Right, but it's still a pretty good place to live, and we want to keep it that way. The promise of democracy is one of collective power and shared responsibility. Many understand that this covenantal promise is not without its challenges. Democracy asks us to engage in issues, to participate in bringing about change, and to care deeply about one another. It is cultivated in the small, consistent actions, in the conversations we have, the ways we listen to and learn from one another, as well as the votes we cast. It demands that we see beyond ourselves, recognizing the dignity of every person and honoring the rich diversity of our lives. With that, it might be time for a song. Kay's already at the piano. 3:18. all say. We distinguish displaying, but not the light of wisdom, and force of the community, or the fire of community. These we carry in our hearts and in our hands, until we rise together in heaven. And in closing, I'll give you the words by D.N. Hill. It is clear that at the heart of this democracy is the promise of the people, our hopes and our dreams. We are the democracy and the stewards of this promise. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe democracy is more than a political system. It is a shared journey, a collective responsibility, and a profound act of faith in one another. May we walk this path with grace, with purpose, and with phenomenal commitment to the common good. And may we all have coffee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything that was-
Thank you for